And we are live from across the pond and a little bit north of here in the Philadelphia area, thereabouts, suburbs. Today we have with us, and I'll just go in order on the screen here, Gavin Stone out of
Good evening.
England. Tell us about yourself a little bit, Gavin.
I'm Gavin Stone, England, former intelligence contractor. Worked in the intelligence and security industry for quite some time, and later turned trainer and now author.
Okay, and how did you get involved with NLP?
It's something that's interested me for many years, along with hypnosis and mind control. That's why I've followed Chase Hughes so intently. I'm a big fan of his work. I've got a lot of experience with NLP, where I've become a qualified practitioner.
Awesome. Now, Dave, well, I don't want to age Dave too much, but Dave is so deep into NLP that he was actually trained by the people who created NLP. And do you want to go into that, Dave? And
Sure.
Introduce yourself.
Sure. Dave Frees. I am an attorney. I was trained years ago as an interrogator. As part of that process and training, I got to meet Richard Bandler and John Grinder, and then over the years trained with them several times in various capacities. And then I stayed in touch with Richard Bandler, who was one of those two, over the years. And so I know what they think NLP is, and I'm happy to chat about that. And I was privileged when I met them. I was interesting to the two of them because they formed NLP in part, and Gavin, you could jump in on this, by studying Frank Husted and Virginia Satir's language patterns. And that's why you see early in NLP a real emphasis on what appears to be psychoanalysis and an application to that type of healing. But Frank, one of my mentors and a psychologist that helped to train me from the time I was very young was Frank Husted. And Frank used to see patients in Milton Erickson's practice. And so I really had exposure to Ericksonian non-directive techniques, which Gavin has a lot of experience with, from the time I was probably maybe 9 or 10 years old. So once Bandler and Grinder found that background out, then I was more interesting than the average student. So.
Well, you kind of, Frank or Dr. Husted was sort of a neighbor or family friend, right?
Yeah. As a matter of fact, he tells a funny story, which I'll share at some point if you want me to, where he was at one of my parents' parties. Yeah, he was at a party, and he said he heard people yelling. And so he walked into the living room in the home where I live today, the ancestral home of 7 generations now. And and Gavin, that's less common over here on this side. And he said there was a little kid, and adults were gathered around me, and they were shouting at me. And then he said after a few minutes, everything sort of calmed down and they dispersed. And he said, you were just standing there, a little smirk on your face. And I don't remember this, but he came up to me, and according to him, he said, boy, what are you doing? And I said, oh, I'm practicing, Dr. Husted. They said, what are you practicing? And I said, oh, I like to get people worked up and then calm them down. And he said, you certainly seem to be successful at that. And that's what caused him to kind of take an interest in me. He thought of me as a young hypnotist from the first time he really saw me in action.
Well, Gavin, you have a young daughter here. Can it be said that children are natural manipulators?
Oh, yes, definitely. My daughter, I've got the sound going off on this. Sorry about that. My daughter's been at it for a long time, just like anybody else's child. They soon learn to be able to. They know what faces to pull and exactly how to get you on side very, very quick and get their own way. It's education that changes that.
Since I have the author of what is it, The Language of Parenting, and let me see.
It's an excellent book. Whoever wrote that.
Yeah. who the hell? If I don't know if I can read that name, I can't tell it. But at what point? Because I think of body language, I think of all of these things as skills that we've carried throughout time that we've trained ourselves out of. Like observationally speaking, but but possibly convincing and influencing and things like that. So at what point have you seen that both of you can answer, do you start to lose these skills? Do we become as the Supertramp song goes, become logical.
It's interesting. So I'll jump in. Gavin, you can stop me. But I think that we as humans are the survivors of people who were great storytellers. So those folks who listened attentively to stories and from the tribal elders who were great storytellers, that's how information was transmitted on how we survived, where we went in the winter and where we went in the summer and where we went for clean water and what the dangers were. Also, we have built into us through this sort of evolutionary process, those people that survived, a high level of situational awareness. But we living in the kind of society we live in now, where situational awareness seems to be less prized, and there's just less danger that you're going to be terminated by something going on around you, or at least the perception that there's less danger. I think the world is a more peaceful place. We kind of let some of those skills slide that we couldn't afford to as short a time ago as a few hundred years. So to your point, Eric, I think we have become less situationally aware, even in close-up communication. Those signals that we used to interpret in terms of body language and pupil dilation and micro expressions that we used to all see as a society, those are, we just don't pay as close attention to them. So the people that do, like Chase Hughes or a Gavin Stone, they have a superpower, but their superpower is just doing what we were all evolutionarily programmed to do. And that, to Gavin's point, I think school and some of our social institutions just beat it out of us.
Yeah, we're all born creative geniuses, and like you said, Dave, storytelling was kind of the way we were educated originally before there was formal education.
But therein lies a superpower, Eric, which is that that's still deep inside of us. So when if we are aware of what's going on, and we are a good storyteller, or we build that skill through practice, you could still get attention and kind of bypass conscious critical function by being able to tell a really good story. The minute you start a story, and this is a technique to prepare for this, I was looking at Wikipedia that said NLP was a totally pseudoscientific, that there was zero evidence for any of its propositions. But it doesn't take more than telling a story with what the NLP folks would call a nested loop to see that there is absolutely some observable evidence for some aspects of NLP. I think a lot of the criticism comes from people who've done bad things with it, or who try to say that it does this or that, and they're just patently absurd. And so instead of judging NLP based on what its founders were trying to teach and how they learned and adapted through time, many people that are judging NLP are judging, pickup artist community, saying that they're using NLP for some nefarious purpose or another. But all you have to do is tell a story. Like, I'll give you an example. I used to tell a story to my kids, and I just make it up as I go, but I'd say, there we were watching the chief by the fire, telling a story about his grandmother. And then she told a story about her granddaughter. Now, there's so many stories going on at the same time there that their conscious brain is interested. It sounds like an interesting story, but it's paying attention to this confusion that's going on about which story are we in. And that this gives us the ability to reach people in a way where we're not as influenced, or they're not as judgmental using their conscious mind. They're more open to what it is that we have to tell.
Well, Gavin, it's been said, I think as Mary Angelou or something like that, that nobody listens to what they say. What you say, they determine how you make them feel.
Yeah.
Is that on place for it? And with NLP, and I'm just asking, we're talking about our evolution versus what's actually going on in the world around us. And I think things are very off kilter. Our brains are still 100,000 years back in ability. Are you walking around with a weapon because there's like a bunch of little loose wires in there that everybody's forgot that are out there, and you can kind of tweak them?
It's the way I see NLP is more of a see, it's been called everything from cult actions to mind control and everything else, and really it's kind of sales on steroids. Okay,
so let's back up. What is neuro-linguistic programming? I'm going to go with Gavin. give us the definition, because I said that's what the show is. What is it?
Okay. So the best way to explain NLP is the study and implementation of multiple techniques and methods to emulate excellence. Which started with Richard Bandler and John, as Dave knows. Their approach was originally looking at psychotherapists, and this is what I've been told, so please, Dave, correct me if I'm wrong.
Yourself real quick.
Sorry, there we go. Originally looking at psychotherapists and the way that some of them had great results in a matter of days, even hours, whereas some of them took kind of years and were still not getting the result that they wanted. So they decided to see if there was a way that they could emulate what the good psychotherapists were doing, and it built a broader spectrum from there. That was like the foundation for it. What makes them great, and then it kind of it stemmed off in many directions.
How does that relate to CBT then? Was it cognitive behavioral training?
Cognitive behavioral therapy?
Yeah, cognitive behavioral therapy and timeline therapy and hypnosis are all parts of NLP. And they all kind of stemmed off and kind of grew in different directions. And this is why NLP itself is a very broad subject. A bit like when you say, what is art? You know, it could be anything from a painting to Mount Rushmore to, you know, any number of things. NLP is very much the same. It's not one specific kind of subject or method, as it were. I mean, Dave, you're more educated than me in this. You knew Richard Bandler, so please.
Well, how did they define it?
I think we could look like CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, is a way of using the same sort of information or brief therapy in a purely therapeutic context. Meaning that a therapist would be using these techniques, where NLP was endeavoring to give people a model or a methodology to produce better results in a mental or psychological world where they were trying to achieve a higher level of happiness or a higher level of athletic performance. NLP was trying to figure out, how do we model excellence? That's what Richard Bandler and John Grinder would say to you probably at the start and probably to this day. They did describe it, and other people have described it as a programming language for the mind, getting the conscious mind to be able to communicate with the unconscious mind in a meaningful way to get desired outcomes. And then other people have called it a methodology of knowing how to achieve goals and desired outcomes. So the connection to psychotherapy came kind of as a historical accident. Gavin's correct that Richard Bandler and John Grinder, in their quest to find a way of reproducing excellent results, picked Virginia Satir and Richard Bandler, who Gavin's talking about as two psychotherapists. Virginia Satir, the kind of mother of modern family therapy, and Milton Erickson, the sort of father of, not to use binary gender, for which I apologize, but the father of modern non-authoritarian medical hypnosis. So Erickson is a psychiatrist using hypnosis in his practice to get these really dramatic results, and he's using certain language patterns. Virginia likewise is using very different language patterns, but getting dramatic results in terms of family dynamics. So what they said is, let's go look at these two. Can
you give me an example of a language pattern that she used as an example?
Sure. So I hope I don't mix these up, but I'm much more familiar with Ericksonian language patterns. But one of the things that they picked up on when they were developing NLP and looking at these two is that Erickson people would say, oh, Bob is always driving me crazy, or he's always behaving like a jerk. And so in Erickson's models, he would say, he would question the absolute, like, is he always? And people would go like, well, no, not always. And, when you say he's acting like a jerk, how's he acting? And so people would begin to modify the way that they were talking to themselves internally, just because they realized, well, he isn't a jerk. And by the way, they were also heavily influenced by Robert Anton Wilson and Korzybski. That's where the linguistic part comes from. And so they would try to get people, for example, instead of saying he is a jerk, they try to get people to say, well, he is behaving like a jerk. At least it seems that way to me right now. So you see how we go from this absolute where the guy's a jerk because of what he just did to he did this thing in this moment that seemed to me like my internal representation of the world that he was being a jerk. That leaves open a whole opportunity to change how they perceived themselves and the other person and how they could interact and the results that they could get. So, that's a quick example of something that they detected in language and in the way that these two therapists worked with language. Presupposition is another. So if somebody says, I'm never going to be able to do this,
I was going to ask
say, well, you haven't been able to do it yet, but what would happen if you could? So there's a language pattern where we go from I can't do it to somebody saying, I realize you feel like you can't do it yet. Now we just turned I can't, which is an absolute I can't do it, to feel like you can't yet. That presupposes they will be able to. So when you say back to somebody, I know you feel like you can't yet, they are they're modifying internally how they represent that to themselves because they have to understand your language. And they would say, by the way, what would happen if you could? So now they have to imagine themselves doing it, and you've opened up the possibility in their communication between their conscious and unconscious mind that they could actually do it, which just seconds before they were totally convinced they could not.
Okay, and Gavin, I think you in what he said though, you also are acknowledging their feeling though, correct? That you're saying, I know that you feel like you can't yet, because if you don't say that, if you just say, yes, you can, is that going to have the same effect?
Yeah, it's just reframing their kind of or changing their thought pattern towards any goal or any, it could be anything really, anything they want to achieve or feel like Dave said they can't achieve, and bit by bit you're just turning it like a dial and turning a degree at a time until eventually you've got them to do a complete 180, and they then believe they can go out and achieve it, and if you believe it, you can achieve it.
Okay, so Gavin, I'm going to go back to this. I don't know a lot about NLP. Honestly, I do know that I keep hearing about it though. Like every time you're at a seminar, oh, they're doing NLP. Every time there's some sort of recruiting mechanism for, dare I say, a 4-letter word that could be multi-level marketing or it could be something worse. Oh, they're using NLP to get into people's heads. So can you give me an example of, Gavin, you're on the stage now. I'm out there and you're going to get to me. What would be maybe a couple things that you would start with?
One of my favorite areas of NLP is anchors and association. For anybody who isn't familiar with Pavlov's dogs, in the 1890s, Ivan Pavlov, psychologist from Russia, would ring a bell every time he'd feed his dogs. They eventually associated the bell with food. The dogs would salivate, and eventually, when he'd ring the bell, the dogs would salivate without the food. So, for those who don't know, and that was the bell became the anchor. And so you've got association, whereas you can use a very similar kind of thing in so many things with sales. You can get people to feel good through using an anchor or through association. It's easier on a one-to-one basis than with a crowd, because you can see from someone's reaction when you're setting an anchor, if you're making them feel good, and then eventually ramp it up to fire that anchor when you're at the point of the sales or the pitch, as it were.
Okay, so Dave, one-to-one, they're walking in your office and they don't know what they want to do with estate planning. I'm guessing that you deal with that kind of. I mean, do you use this into your day-to-day life, and what might be an example of how you would approach?
I'll give you a couple of great examples, one-on-one and crowd, but just quickly, I want to observe that you're absolutely correct, Eric, that you hear people all the time say, they're using NLP, they're NLPing me, they're manipulating you through NLP. But what they're doing is they're just saying any good or effective communication technique that they happen to pick up on, or even just good sales training, gets labeled NLP, because NLP is perceived as being this giant umbrella for manipulative techniques. But I'm fond of saying to people, hey, we can communicate with one another the hard way and make it really difficult, or we can do it the easy way. And so NLP has a narrower focus of building models. And in the course of doing that, when they were modeling the psychotherapists and then they were modeling salespeople and other good communicators, of course, they came across techniques that were useful, like the one I was just describing to you. So I'll give you an example of how I might use an anchor. When I was a kid in law school, I did comedy shows in comedy clubs as a way of making money. And I would often go on before or after somebody that was really much better than me. I would stay and watch them. And one time I saw a woman who was performing and she got a big laugh from the audience. And then I noticed she would, having gotten that big laugh, she would deliver the same line again, just echoing it. And so then when I came out,
is that a tag or
that's
what do you
call to Gavin's point, like an anchor.
In comedy though, is that called a tag or a
tag? Yes. So all I did was come out, walk over to where she was the first time she did it, assume the same posture, and deliver the same line. Before I even start, the audience can't resist. They laugh because she's trained them using this anchor to laugh uproariously. What that's done for me is it's created a different neurotransmitter mix in the audience right away. So the audience is going from, oh, the last comedian was funny. Is this guy going to be funny? He looks stupid. I think this might be bad. You know, you don't know what's going on in their head. So by interrupting that pattern, a pattern interrupt, which is another technique or label for the way that often you'll find that NLP labels things that are, have come to us through therapy or sports performance or other things. They just give it a label that is now associated with NLP. But you go out there and you use this anchor that Gavin's talking about, and you go back to where she stood and you take her posture and you deliver the line and they laugh. Now, they're going to view everything after that with the happy sauce that's been released in their brain, which is not, of course, if we were talking to a neuropsychologist here, they would not probably call it the happy sauce, but it's a neurotransmitter.
No, it's a technical term.
It is a very technical neuroscience term, yes. And so now they're going to view everything I do through the lens of a happier state of mind. There is another thing to what Gavin's talking about, where we are, if we made somebody laugh or we noticed somebody felt happy and they're one-on-one and they're sitting across from us. Like, so for example, you asked me for an example in estate planning, and this may sound odd, but if somebody comes in and they look a little nervous about doing it, I will say, it's estate planning. So we're going to talk about people perishing here, getting run over by trucks. You may kill me off anytime you want. And they'll smile, Eric, just like you do. And I'll go, that's right. That's what we're looking for. A total disregard for your personal safety and an understanding that we're all human and mortal. And then they'll laugh again. And I may be making a particular gesture like I was, or doing a particular thing. And then if I see that I'm losing them or they're becoming uncomfortable again, I could use that gesture maybe rather than talking about death and smile. So I don't know. I'd have to look at the literature. And
is that? Well, I don't want to leave that for a second because you mentioned the same gesture, and I apologize for interrupting, but that kind of makes me think of the hookup culture.
Yeah.
Because they do that kind of thing, and they're saying, you touch the elbow, you touch the elbow, you touch the elbow. Now, I'm going to go one step further on that because Mark Bowden, and I think Chase Hughes picked it up from him too, stated that you should never touch the joint because that's a vulnerable spot on people. So you'd want to touch the forearm or touch the upper arm, and you're building the association there without being threatening. So kind of like a double layered weird tip in there. But
well, yeah, and the thing is that you might say, well, that's manipulative if it's being used by a pickup artist. But let's take a step back. Typically, people who have trouble dating and forming bonds of trust in a relationship need some help. And so if somebody's out there and teaching them to ethically and respectfully achieve a bond so that they could form a relationship, that they're at least on a level playing field with other people, I don't consider that to be unethical.
Well, let me know when you find one that's not trying to just get laid. And as soon as you do, I'll be like, hey, go to that, because pretty much everyone that I have read about or seen is pretty much saying, okay, this is a piece of meat on the other side, and this is how you manipulate the meat because you're a good butcher and you're going to kill it. So I'm not really a big fan of them. No, but I understand.
It's part of what's given NLP a bad name is that there are various to use Gavin's term, cults or bad players, people who are behaving in naughty ways. And they're saying, I'm teaching you to use NLP. And I suppose they could be using a technique in a manipulative way that is not ethical. I often say to people that, like, in fact, it's pretty predictable. If I'm teaching leadership or communication skills, there's often a point, I can predict it, where someone will stand up, and I'm sure, Gavin, you've had this, and they'll shout, "That's manipulative," like you're a horrible person. And I always use this opportunity. I say, "Come up here." And they come up, and I basically get them to repeat that it's manipulative. And then I say something that's shocking typically to the audience at this point, which is, listen, all communication is manipulation. You're right, it's manipulative. The only thing that differentiates bad manipulation from, quote, good manipulation is the intention behind it. And I would go one step further and say, how well informed is that intention? So if I'm meeting with a client and I use language patterns that make it easier for them to understand and easier for them to tell me, make them more comfortable telling me what they don't understand, I'm being helpful. And the purpose behind that is to make sure that their wishes are carried out in their estate plan and that I totally understand them and that I feed them back to test that. So the thing is, every time you tell a joke, every time you get your spouse or your loved ones to smile, every time you entertain a child with a story, every time you teach in a meaningful way, it's all manipulation. You're trying to get them to learn something, laugh. It's all manipulation. The question is, are you doing it with a pure enough heart? So in sales, has the salesperson asked the right questions to be sure that the product they're selling is a good match for the person? Then have at it, because you're really trying to help them to make a decision. And these techniques don't override all human capacity for thoughtful decision making, but they do give you a fair chance, because when we're selling something to somebody, I use that in the broadest sense of the word selling. Humans love homeostasis. They don't want to change. When they were in the cave, they knew that when Og went out, he might have gotten eaten by a saber-toothed tiger. He never came back. The cave is safe. So we want to stay where we are. And that's deeply ingrained in us through bioevolutionary things that took place that made us comfortable where we are and feeling safe where we are. But if we really want something and we have to leave the cave to get it, then am I being—
That's where danger is.
Yeah. If I can mitigate the danger and I can convince you to go out and get the thing you want, am I being bad? No, probably not.
Unless they get hit by a car as soon as they do. But
no,
I gotta get
it's a risky world.
Going back to what you said, Eric, about the use of the elbow, it's because the joints are vulnerable. Right. So if you're in a situation where you're setting an anchor on somebody else, they're in a really good mood, they're laughing, and you're touching them on the elbow, subconsciously they're going to become aware of it, because that's a vulnerable point, but I'm okay and I'm having fun. And then they dismiss it and move on. So subconsciously they're aware of it, but at the same time, it's not caused any major reaction, and that starts to set the anchor. So it just sets it a little bit deeper. In fact, I believe the NLP will recommend using a joint rather than not using a joint. Is that
really
right?
Okay? So it's going to go deeper because it does stress.
Yeah. Even down to knuckles being used. David, is that what you've been told as well? Because I've heard that from one person. I've never been able to get it confirmed.
Yeah, so what we're talking about is, quote, setting a physical or tactile anchor here.
Yeah.
And I have heard people say to me, I'm more of a voice guy. I don't necessarily touch you. This world makes me way less likely to get sued.
Well, women are especially effective on the touching.
Oh,
it's natural for them, I think.
Yeah, it doesn't matter. And I think it's historically. So I'm about to say something that could be easily misinterpreted, but in the world in which we evolved, women felt much safer touching one another and a man than they felt being touched by a man. So that's still within us, and that's why we should be very careful as men before we make contact with a woman. But all of these anchors that Gavin refers to, rekindling a particularly strong emotion. So I think, to Gavin's point, the stronger the emotion you see going on, and the stronger the connection, the more likely it is to take that you'd be able to rekindle that emotion. So I can tell you, I recently thought of something I used to do with both my son and daughter. If I saw them smiling, I would come toward them, and I had set this anchor earlier, and I would touch their nose and go, boop, 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 and they would just burst out into hysterical laughter. And I did it for as long as probably that was appropriate to do. And then years later, probably they were in their 20s, I thought, I wonder if that still works, because I typically only did it when we had a very high level of emotion. We were on a boat in New Zealand. Somebody had told a joke. Everybody was cracking up, and I would do it. So I had, to Gavin's point, strong emotion with a really weird, unusual anchor no one could help but notice. And so I did the same thing to the two of them that I used to. I have three, but I did more to the two. The other would not have been as amused by that. And both of them in their 20s still burst out into uproarious laughter. And it had probably been 10 years since I had done that. So Gavin would say that that was a deep, well-set anchor.
Oh, definitely. And most people have already got them. Because an anchor doesn't need to be physical. It can be a smell, a sound, a sight. It can be visual. And a great example is, have you ever been driving down the road and a song has come on the stereo and automatically you feel good? It just puts you in a great mood immediately. Everybody's got that one song. And on the flip side, there's usually another song that has the opposite effect that makes you feel bad. You might not even know the reason why. But you hear it come on the stereo and you turn it
off. Singing it, but that's a different.
Real estate agents also put baked cookies in the oven. But I got to get to questions from that we're a half hour in plus. So I really should acknowledge folks here. Jamie Beaumont says, having been involved with NLP since the late 90s, in my opinion, 80% of what I've seen or experienced is useless, but 20% and that's an often overlooked can be an amazing toolkit. Could that be because a lot of things, as you stated earlier, are associated with NLP that aren't necessarily NLP? They're just like noise?
I think that's a fair observation. And and Eric, I think your observation is correct too. And I think part of that also may be that each and every one of us is more effective at doing, whether it's therapy or hypnosis or NLP. Some of the tools are better in my hands and some of them are better in Gavin's. And so the 80% that's rubbish is going to be a different 80% for all of us. And the 80-20 rule is deeply embedded in the world. It's magic.
Pareto. It's a Pareto.
Pareto principle. And those 20%, like probably 5 to 10% of the techniques that I use get me 80 to 90% of the fantastic results. And those are just because they're naturally, my skill set makes me better at using them. Maybe my skill set combined with training. So that's my view of that. He's probably, I think that's a very smart observation.
Okay, and I've got this using it. I'll have Gavin start on this one. I studied in NLP 40 years ago, and the one thing I remember is that our subconscious cannot hear or understand the word no. Can you comment on that, Gavin?
Yeah, the subconscious, even the mind doesn't process negatives. So, for example, if I say to you, "Don't think of a black cat," automatically you think of a black cat. So this is where, and I'm assuming I might be wrong here, but I'm assuming this is where they're saying things like, when people greet you,
"Don't spill that milk."
Yeah. I used to say myself a lot when people would say, "How are you doing?" I'd say, "Not bad." And it's the worst thing in the world to say, because what your subconscious or your mind is hearing is that you're bad. And going back to what Dave was saying about homeostasis earlier, if your mind says, "Oh, bad is keeping us safe, so we've got to keep us bad because we're obviously that's where we're at." So instead of saying, "I'm not bad," you say, "I'm better by the day," or "I'm doing great, I'm doing fine, how are you?" And that's where the kind of, and like I say, I might be off with what he asked there, but the no and the negatives should be avoided in those situations.
No, I think you're on, because you're saying that you're ignoring any qualifier. Because if you say not bad, everybody's bypassing it and they just go straight to the one word. They're not understanding the negative. It's like a double negative equals a positive type of situation. And I think Dave actually has the example of, don't tell your kids, don't spill the milk, because then that will visualize they're spilling the milk as they're walking across the room. Or don't spill your drink, versus
Be careful with your drink, or
hold steady as you walk.
Yeah. I try to do that a lot with my own daughter. Yeah, you're right. It's it's amazing how many people will say something like, don't do that, don't do this, when they should be saying, be more careful with that, be more careful with this.
I'll give you a great example that I observed in Yosemite National Park. I saw a kid climbing over a fence that was there to keep him from falling thousands of feet. And his mother said to him, I was afraid she was going to say, don't fall over that fence. But she said to him, put both of your feet back down on the ground, which he immediately did.
Yeah.
Had he said the other, he would have envisioned or visualized himself falling. That doesn't, just visualizing it doesn't mean it's going to happen. But when you say don't do this or don't do that, you're having the person mentally rehearse for the reasons that Gavin and your questioner raised. The unconscious mind doesn't process the negative. Gavin's black cat, when you say don't see it, your unconscious mind conjures it up immediately. And then you're relying on the slower, more deliberative conscious mind to go, no, wait, don't do that. But you've already seen the cat in the meantime.
Yeah. And of course, one of my favorites is when people say to you, don't forget to bring some milk and bread home, instead of saying, remember to bring some milk and bread home. When you're leaving to go out for the day, you're literally telling them to forget. If they say, don't forget to bring some milk home with you.
By the way, just a quick tip for those in the audience, this would be maybe appropriate or not, is when people ask how you are. Another thing, depending on how well you know them and the circumstances, you still might want to interrupt, because when people ask how you are, it's part of a little play that they've already rehearsed in their head. They say like, I'm fine or good. So if you say instead like, fantastic, with super high levels of testosterone and an appetite that just won't quit, they're going to react very differently to that. They're going to pop out of the pre-programmed mindset they were in. I'm going to ask Dave how he is. He's going to tell me he's good. We're going to move on. So they're not really paying attention. But when you mention the high testosterone and gigantic appetite for bourbon, you're like, whoa, I got to hear more about this. And you have their attention.
Yeah, it's pattern interrupt.
They became good at this. They modeled it because they would say to me, Daddy, keep your, depending on the summer or the winter, keep your bourbon or your gin in the cup, and then just enjoy drinking it carefully now, don't you?
This is water, by the way.
On that note, when you're saying, how are you? Isn't it true that a handshake is used as an induction technique because it's that same rote pattern that people are into, and you're throwing it off? So are you in essence doing the exact same thing there when somebody says, how are you? And like I can ask them, they'll say, I'm fine, but I'll deliberately answer something else all the time. But is that what you're doing? The same as a handshake induction, just you're doing a pattern interrupt?
Video. I'm too young to have seen Milton do it, but I've seen video of Milton Erickson do a handshake interrupt, because when everybody's putting their hand out, you expect to shake hands and then move on from there. But instead, if Milton, first of all, had an amputation, as I recall, or was that Frank? No, Frank had an amputation above the elbow. So people would go to shake hands with him, and Dr. Husted would stick out his amputated arm, and people would look at it and you would go, that's right, you're feeling very different than you thought you were going to now, aren't you? Milton would use language patterns to do it too. I saw him once doing a therapy session, saw video again to be clear, where he has a mother and her daughter there, and he goes, there you are, Janet, sitting next to Susie, going into trance. But that's a phonetic ambiguity. Like, who's going into trance? Both of their brains are hearing that they're relaxing and going into trance. So these are things, Eric, to your point, where you're kind of breaking a pattern or tricking the unconscious mind into, because of an ambiguity, just being more open to what's about to happen.
Okay, so Gavin, and we're getting into the hypnosis aspect of this. How much of NLP is hypnosis in disguise? And how much of it is just, no, that's only one thing. Hypnosis is a whole nother field, and we just borrow a couple things in the Venn diagram.
They all kind of merge. Ellman and Erickson and were in kind of two separate camps, as it were. And yet, if they'd teamed up, there would have been a formidable force, no two ways about it. But the NLP can be used quite easily with your language patterns in hypnosis and vice versa. The pattern interrupt that Dave was on about is used in hypnosis, where you can literally take somebody's hand, put it up in front of their face, and it's called the rapid induction technique, where they're like that, and it puts them almost immediately into trance if you've had the right pre-talk. And that's something. It doesn't have to be physical. It can be done with a confusion statement or a pattern interrupt, and the two merge, but they are still two separate subjects.
Now, do both of you do the whole Darren Brown thing where you go to the store and never pay for anything because you're replacing it with a piece of paper, or just say, no, that's fine, asking for directions, and when they tell you that, then you say something else, which throws them off, and say get free coffee for days?
I haven't used it for that, but I do use it on my wife.
Who's watching now?
Yes, she is. She can tell you.
I'm a big Darren Brown fan, and have been to some of his in-person shows in London, and watched his show. And he's just a supernatural performer. I don't know that he would say he was using NLP or hypnosis, but certainly he's using the way that he achieves a lot of those apparently miraculous results are techniques that you could label with the hypnosis label or the NLP label. So if somebody said to you, oh, Darren Brown is using NLP, they'd probably be more accurate than lots of other contexts where they're saying that guy's NLPing or using NLP.
Well, good. That's the second half of what I wanted to talk about. So, Gavin, back on you.
Mm-hmm.
What is NLP not?
So many things that it's mislabeled as. There's a lot of people that say it's mind control or a form of mind control, and a lot of people that say it's not. If you open your mind about mind control and just not see it as somebody turning you into a zombie, but more of a sales pattern or a technique, a way of convincing somebody, manipulation, if you like, then yes, it can be considered mind control, but not in the sense that somebody clicks their fingers and has you walking around like a zombie. It's been called everything from cults to cheesy sales techniques, all manner of different.
Do cults use it or no?
Sorry, say that again.
Do cults use it? I've heard that they do.
I should imagine they probably do. Yeah. I've never been in a cult personally, luckily. But it wouldn't surprise me. It wouldn't surprise me if it was used by them to kind of gain control over people's patterns and change their life.
Okay, so Dave, to you, what is it not? Because if the term's being abused, then we should kind of get out the way to say, this, it's not this. Stop calling it that. And
so if you read Wikipedia, it's a pseudo-scientific psychopablum with zero evidence to support any. But when you carefully read who is saying these things, they are therapists, psychiatrists, who have an interest in making sure that the magic of some of these techniques remains in the professions that is certified to do it. At NLP, if I could say what it is for a second to contrast what it's not,
of course, is
just really a framework where they put labels on particularly effective ways that humans communicate with one another, so that more people have access to understanding them and understanding human communication. So that's what I would say it is. And so what it is not, that it's accused of, is having zero scientific support. There are certainly scientific studies who've been performed that have discredited certain aspects of an NLP technique, like eye accessing cues. Right. And everybody's heard this, you look up and to the right when you're imagining an image, and you look up and to the left when you're recalling one. So if somebody looks up and to the right, that is a lie or a manufactured answer that they're going to give. Well, not even Bandler and Grinder said that. That was a kind of a common misinterpretation of it. They would have said, if you ask people questions and watch what they do with their eyes, you'll learn a lot about what they do and how they access images, auditory, recalled sounds, or sounds that you're making up. But the thing was that they were always suggesting to calibrate for that there was no one way that people did it. They weren't making things up if they looked this way and telling you the truth if they looked that way, but that you could learn. So I can give your audience that's listening and watching a quick example. Mm-hmm. If everybody is with me and you remember brushing your teeth this morning, virtually everybody's going to make that picture here. I mean, it may be somebody else, but just notice where you made that picture. Mm-hmm. And if I ask your audience, assuming they're older than 16, can you remember what you did on your 16th or your 21st birthday? If they're older than 16 or 21, they're going to make that picture in a different place. And it's very common for humans, to sort time this way. Like the past is over on the left, the present or really recent past is here, and things we're imagining in the future are over here. The reverse of that is very common too. There's also people that see current things here and then imagine things go out here. So it's not that there's no scientific evidence for that. We can ask people those questions and we can see it happening. There's just no scientific evidence that there's one way that people do it.
Mm-hmm. Right. I heard it was actually part of a military experiment. There were some problems with it. Is this similar to Moravian, the 73855, in the sense that he stated one thing, like if you have no other information than like if somebody says hello to you, you're going to, in that one instance, determine that 55% of it is going to be on like their body language, 38% is going to be the tonality of their voice, and 7% will be the actual word itself. That people have run with it and said, only 7% of your communication is done through words. It's everything else is body language. Is that the problem that's going on?
Yeah, I think that's a problem. It's an overgeneralization or an over-specific characterization, meaning we've taken something that they've said to generally use and to calibrate to a particular situation, and we've said, this is it, and that's typically wrong. Or we've said it always works this way when there are more generalized rules or variants. So yeah, I think that's a good example of how and why it's been criticized. But it's also been called, to Gavin's point, like a mind control technique. Like you take a weekend course in NLP and you're going to be able to cure people of phobias, or you're going to be able to get them to do extraordinary things that they wouldn't otherwise do. I think in the right hands of somebody who's been trained in a number of perspectives on human communication, NLP is probably empowering to them because it kind of consolidates all of these things they've learned from lots of different places that all have some value, and it gives them a framework and an ability of categorizing them, and an ability to find out which ones work well for them and then deploy them more often. But it isn't like a pill that you take and then suddenly you're just telling people to stare into your eyes and they carry out your will. Now, having said that, look at politics, look at that propaganda in leading up to World War II, and look at what's been happening in our society. And you will see that many of these techniques that we're talking about or described in the literature on hypnosis and NLP and propaganda are being used very widely in the United States across a spectrum of political views. So
Cialdini kind of describes it. He doesn't say it as NLP, but persuasion is all about that. Mm-hmm. And okay, back to
by the way, we're not being controversial enough, because I see Ziggy jumped in, but we're not triggering people into some kind of rage question. You must have an awesome, sophisticated audience, because
they're bored. They're waiting for you to tell them something they don't know.
Well, I did my testosterone, bourbon, and gin. I mean,
no, you got to pick it up, man. Pick it up. You got to keep up with the crowd here. Jeez. You guys, I mean, let me down. What? All right, question. So if NLP is not just one thing, but incorporates many, should people try to identify the aspect that works best for them, or they might be better at?
Yeah, yes, unambiguously. I'll defer to Gavin, but yes, I can expand when Gavin's done.
Go, Gavin.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, start with what you know, start with what you're good at, and build out from there. Definitely. Because there are so many subjects covered by it, not just language patterns, but hypnosis and everything else, then yeah, I believe so. Dave?
Yeah. So I think, for example, there's a whole body of NLP or a number of NLP techniques or strategies that are informed, as I was mentioning before, by Korzybski, who was a linguist. Those are really hard for lots of people to understand and use, but they're super powerful. So if you can understand them, that's where the is part was that I was talking about. They're kind of abstract, but if you can master them, they make you a more powerful person. To answer your question here, if you could start to catch yourself saying he is this or she is that. So a lot of times we do this the opposite. We go, wow, she's super intelligent.
That actually leads into another comment. So you're not off the hook yet. Just keep right going, because I feel like Perry Bates is saying right here. Are there any more everyday patterns that we run or run with others that might benefit from a cheeky pattern break?
Oh my gosh, yes. I love the cheeky, and he's letting me off the hook. A lot of people would call it rude or there have been many labels applied to my cheeky pattern breaks.
He's British, like Gavin. They've got that little je ne sais quoi.
I was rambling on about something. What was that expression you used, Gavin? I was rambling on, or what was it?
I'm not sure.
It was good though. So are there any more everyday patterns that we run with others that we might benefit from breaking? Yeah, so you'll see these. You'll get into patterns with people. And so, for example, there are people in my staff meetings who always want to agree. And I know they disagree because they're giving me all kinds of signs that they do. But so we started something that I believe is advocated. It's advocated by lots of leadership trainers, but Captain David Marquette, in his recent book, Leadership is Language, which if you're interested in this live stream, you'd be interested in that. That he rotates a card, he calls it a black card, around, and whoever gets it in this meeting is responsible for being the naysayer. They are supposed to figure out everything that's wrong with everything we said, and it's their job. And this is quite brilliant because it breaks that pattern that I'm just talking about there, and it lets the group know, well, first of all, it helps that person to feel safe in a collaborative environment, but where they're disagreeing with me, which is what I want. I want to know, like, what are the problems? I don't want them to tell me what I want them to hear. And then it also says to everybody else, hey, look, there's a safe place for this. Not only is it safe, it's your job. You're in trouble if you don't do it. So you can look for these patterns that he's asking about in group interaction. Another pattern that I would say I observe all the time, and that Marquette also discusses in his book. I'm not a shill for David Marquette. I just happen to have appeared speaking at some conferences with him recently. And so I've been exposed to his work, and I think it's really excellent. So, one of the things that he says is that leaders will often say that they're getting the view of their subordinates or their team, but they start off by saying, so this is what we're going to do. As long as that's okay with everybody, I think it's pretty well thought out. Do you? Well, now if they disagree with them, there's trouble. So the way he puts it is vote first, then discuss it later. In other words, don't let the leader get the leader's view out there discreetly or overtly, because that's going to influence people. And they've done some really interesting scientific testing on this.
Oh, he's the turn the ship around guy.
Ship around, and then the second book is Leadership is Language. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Okay.
Really good books. The one's a little bit more strategic, and one's a little bit more about boots on the ground. How do you actually do this?
Well, he was talking about, and sorry to interrupt, but I vaguely remember he's told a story, I guess, about all the sailors, and they had mentioned that essentially, whenever they look, all they see are asses above them. It's like monkeys in a tree. If you're on the ground, all you're going to see are the asses above you. And that was the problem with the leader. One of the problems, for some reason, that popped in my head, but it was a very colorful image, and it's very true if you think about it. It's like, okay, they're so far above me.
Going back to what Parry said about pattern breaks, if there's something that could be useful, a good example is if you're, say, a telesales person, you'll ring up with usually a script. You'll start off with the same, hi, it's me from wherever I'm calling from. Can I speak to so-and-so? And it puts people into a mode straight away. Once they hear telesales people, they automatically go into that defensive, no, nobody wants to talk to you mode. And if you pattern break at that point, where you say, "Hi, it's Gavin Stone here. I'm just calling up to speak to John. Quickly though, before I do, pineapple on pizza, yes or no?" And I go, "What?" And it throws them. It breaks that pattern. And you just look.
And by the way, it's no.
Yeah.
It's no. It's not even a question here. That's just a sin. It's disgusting.
Inappropriate.
So I don't even know why you would bother. You need to come up with a better pattern.
You could ask them anything. What their favorite song from the 80s was, whether peaches should be served with cream, anything at all, and just say, "Look, we've been having an office debate. What are your thoughts on it?" And that it just breaks the pattern. It gets them talking. It throws them. It drops that defensive guard of no, nobody's going to talk to you. And then you can start building rapport, and then you can kind of build from there and aim at your sale.
Scott Rouse did a super chat. Thank you, Scott. And he did not know you were British.
Oh, dear.
Gavin doesn't know he's British either. He wants to be here in the States.
Yeah.
Gavin identifies as an American.
Oh,
He does. He does.
I am an American. I was just born in the wrong country.
I'm even trying to say, you know what? Just go halfway there. Be part of the empire. You can hang out in Canada for a while. That's pretty close.
Yeah, that's a start.
But okay. So pattern breaks, pattern interrupts. I don't know why, but this popped in my head that NLP, from what I'm hearing, could be like 6 Sigma for the mind. And I don't know, but I always think of pattern and processes, and I know 6 Sigma does a lot of that, where you're saying, okay, you got to make these products, and to make the products, you have this particular assembly line or structure or procedure or whatever. Is that similar? Like, you need to go sell this car, you need to go perform this action, that then you take the world-class performers. I think I saw somewhere that they took snipers or people who worked rifles, and they said, okay, we got to get these Marines to shoot better, find the best shooters in the Marines, let's go look at what they do, and then they reverse engineer the processes and mindsets, what they talked about, how they spoke, everything else, to shrink the training time. Is that a off the wall analogy or too crazy?
No, it's a very good analogy. And I think Richard has probably said, and some of these definitions I was reading echo it, which is that it's like a programming language for the mind. So at the time in the 70s, as computer science and computer languages were being developed, and both of these guys were involved in that, they were looking at the brain as an operating system for the human body and mind. And they said the problem is that the conscious mind does not know how to optimally communicate with the unconscious mind. And so they were looking for a way of creating a language or a methodology or a system to improve communication between the mind and the mind body. And then they wanted to use that to model really excellent behavior, either of athletes or teachers or students. In other words, at the meta level, how do we learn more about learning? Well, one of the things that NLP was good at, and Gavin, you can talk about elicitation, but I'm good at elicitation. I can find out, like if you ask an expert, Joe, you're an expert at X, tell me how you do it. Joe will tell you his story that he tells himself about how he does it. But there are ways using NLP techniques to elicit from Joe at a much more granular and detailed level what he's really doing. And you can believe them or not. I'd have to look at the literature to see how much the science has examined this particular aspect of NLP. But I can tell you anecdotally that I've been able to work with, and this is what you were talking about, Eric, with the shooters, and they were trying to reduce marksman qualification time. Oh, is Chase Hughes on?
Yeah, he's doubling up on Scott Rouse. He's saying Scott's slacking, and he wants to definitely do more than Scott.
Good.
And anybody here, sorry to interrupt, everybody knows that I'm in thick with these behavior panel guys, and there's always something going on between Chase and Scott.
Chase,
anytime you watch it, I encourage everyone.
Just embarrass Scott. Put another 50 on there, and I'll pay you back.
There you go.
Just put it to Scott.
So, Gavin, to continue on that point, there's a term that I've always found to be kind of offensive, but I think there is, some resonance in there that may be legit, and that's fake it till you make it. is that in essence what you may be doing? Because, like we're talking about 1 weekend course in NLP, and I'm immediately, my bullshit meter comes up and goes and says, hey, you're not going to pull it off in 1 weekend, all the the things you need to do. You're going to have to
up yours.
You are going to have to study over a period of time. And I'll use Christina Lennon, who we both know. She's a world famous hypnotist. Amazing. She studied hypnosis for 2 years as a therapist before she even dared set foot on stage or anything else. And that's a whole nother art, which she also studied too. So NLP.
I believe I heard something which was really, really great a couple of days ago. Chase, you just
this is great.
Hey, just tell me where to send the check. We got to go.
Anybody else wants to jump in? I'm perfectly fine. We can have a bidding war for everybody. Feel free. Awesome to have you.
Where's Mark? Where's Mark?
Eric,
he's British as well, isn't he? So he won't be paying.
Well, it's Canadian, so it's not as strong.
So I forgot what the question was now.
Fake it till you make it.
Oh yeah, fake it till you make it. So yeah, I heard a brilliant thing the other day, which was you can't learn NLP. You have to learn NLP. You can't watch a video or read a book and have you can have the intellectual knowledge, but not the skill. You have to go out and you have to learn it by applying it and doing it in the real world, and each and every part of it in itself, looking for patterns, looking for language patterns, that kind of thing, is an art in itself. A typical example, I helped a couple out a few years ago. They were having marital issues, and when I looked at that, I was communicating with both of them. And I looked at their messages, and his messages, you don't see what I'm saying. She doesn't see what I mean. She doesn't get my point of view. And all her messages were, we don't talk. He doesn't listen to me. He doesn't.
One's verbal, one's visual.
Yeah, one's verbal. One's audible, one's visual. They were talking effectively 2 different languages. And from the outside, I could see it quite easily, having the experience in NLP, but to each other, they were both just rowing and not getting, just hitting, what do they call it? Locking horns. That's the word. So yeah, it was later on when I pointed it out to them and said, look, you need to realize each other's language patterns. That changed everything, and the relationship was great from there on out.
Okay, so on this note, because we're at time, I'm going to put out a question. What would it take for you two to create a course on this? And let's say it's sponsored under this channel. I guess there's 2 questions. There's you guys. Would you be interested in creating a course? And this is for everybody who's watching. And if you're here at the end, I think there's some interest. In the comments below, are you interested in a course from these 2 gentlemen on NLP? So, putting them on the spot. Dave Frees, are you going to help develop a course?
Yeah, sure. I mean, to your point, and to Gavin's point, a really short course where you're not seeing people and how they're reacting has to have the caveat and the disclaimer that this is all it could do, but it can really help you to understand language patterns, the work of Korzybski, and it can help you to understand how do you use these things in day-to-day life.
And that's what I want. I don't want a course that says that you're going to go and be a master salesman or anything else. I'm talking about a course, a reasonable course that just says, here's what it is, here's what it's not, and here's where you go from here to actually master it.
Yeah, and I think that as part of that course, if you put together a syllabus for people that really want to do the work, again, to Gavin's point, you can't just read these books and become masterful at it, but there are the literature on Ericksonian hypnosis, NLP, linguistics, the body of literature runs from the ridiculous to the sublime and the useless to the incredibly applicable. And so I think one of the things where we could do your viewers and listeners a real service is to put together a set of resources, both that we could write and that would refer people to vetted materials that that either help them to understand the strategy and the psychology behind it, or how to apply the techniques, or how to engage in activity that was going to be self-improving by definition. So we could do that. I suppose we could do that.
Yeah,
Gavin.
yeah. I mean, like Dave said, it would literally be informational. But yeah, we can give them the information in the right order for them to be able to take it on board, start to implement it day to day, and start to use it and in their life in areas where it's applicable. So yeah, definitely, I'd give that a go, Dave.
All right, well, perfect, fantastic. And by the way, if it's done in that manner, it doesn't have to be super expensive. And that's one thing. I don't want any crazy, like, oh, for $2,000, I can't stand that. No, I'm sorry, $1,700. It's always got to end with a 7. So it will not end with a 7 for all Mike Winnett fans. But we'll look into doing this. I think it'll be fantastic. And in the meantime, folks, please subscribe and stick around.
Chase as soon as we get off and find out where he wants me to send that $50. He's already in for a good bit.
Hey, no, that's definitely awesome, and thank you so much. And also, folks, please subscribe if you want to learn more too. And both these guys are there. They stalk around a little bit, but you can ask questions on locals, and I think that both of them will respond on that. And also look back on this video if you have comments below. But if you will, please subscribe, please hang out, please tell a friend, please hit the like button, and please take care of yourself.
Eric, before you go, I'd just like to say, I just noticed my image here, and damn it, I look handsome.
It is not quite clear.